Woolly mammoths went extinct thousands of years ago, but scientists are hard at work trying to understand what caused their extinction, some even going as far as try to resurrect the great beasts. Joining us now to tell us more about this research is Hendrik Poinar. He is the director of the Ancient DNA Center at McMaster University and Researcher at the Michael G. DeGroote Institute for Infectious Disease Research. Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to be here.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the woolly mammoth, which I suppose everyone says, wow, you must have a really cool job, because that sounds super cool.
I do. I have a really good job, and I'm fortunate I actually get to travel up north and collect, samples of these extinct beasts that I loved as a kid, of course, growing up.
Of course.
Yeah,
okay, so we're going to talk about the woolly mammoth, but let's start with this term, de-extinction. What is it?
So it's the idea of taking the genetics of extinct species and trying to resurrect them in some degree and then relocate them into populations and climates and environments that they once existed in.
And why would we do that?
Well, I think there's a couple different reasons why one would do that. One is to restore the ecology of what we lost. So there's constant climate change and environmental flux, and in a lot of cases, we lost a lot of beasts along the way due to extinction because of these rapid climate changes or human predation. And so bringing some of these back are critical for the restoration of the normal ecology and environment of certain areas.
And what's the benefits of that? Because I think you could make the argument as a lay person that extinction happens. It's happened through time forever, and it's just a natural process to some extent, and unnatural one in others. But what's the goal?
Well, I think ultimately, I think there are multiple goals, and of course, de-extinction is a very broad term for a very large movement. But I think one has to be very specific about key species that might be worthwhile to bring back from an ecological standpoint, right? So the woolly mammoth is one that actually has a very significant meaning to bring back, I think, not only just because I think it rejuvenates the idea of conservation, but I think it also allows us to restore the ecology of the North to something that it once was, which it currently isn't, and undergoing this rapid flux that is currently happening.
And what would be the benefit of that, though, returning? You made this point that bringing back an ecology that once was.
Yeah.
So what would be the benefits of that?
Well, so in the case of mammoths, I think one of the best reasons to bring back the woolly mammoth is if you go to the north currently, where the mammoths used to roam, these large populations on the size of several hundred thousands to millions of beasts walking across the Yukon, Northwest Territories, they actually produced a very fertile grassland. And that grassland led to exceptionally good rooting depths. And that meant that during winter, all those rooting depths and everything was deeply frozen. And that prevented the release of these gigatons of greenhouse gases that are slowly being released today. So now we've lost the mammoth, which was what we call a keystone species, which means everything around it, both plants and animals, sort of revived and lived off the presence of the woolly mammoth. We've lost that, and so we've now got mosses instead of grasses. And so the ecology is completely shifted, and greenhouse gases are slowly leaching out. So there's actually a good ecological reason to bring back something.
What happened to these guys and gals?
Well, that's a very good question. The paleontologists have been pitted about the debate as to what caused the extinction of large animals in general from North America about 11,000 years ago. And so there's two camps. One, people believe that we know right at that time, about 11,000 years ago, there was a major shift in climate. And so we think that large forests that were actually sort of blooming from the south were pushing these mammoths into sort of refugial populations that ultimately led to their extinction. But at the same time, we have the arrival of big game hunters into North America. And so the other camp thinks that it was hunters that were, not surprisingly, very good and had excellent tools, actually hunted them to extinction. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it was a confluence of both.
So 11,000
years ago.
Okay, this all happens 11,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So fast forward 11,000 years, here we are, 2015. What is it? What do we have of the woolly mammoth to bring it back, if I can put it that way?
Well, so I mean, the reality is we've got beautifully preserved remains. So we have complete skeletons, we have tusks, we have teeth, we have complete actual mummies of babies that were buried in lakes that were then frozen, or mud that was then frozen, and that is only thawing recently. And a lot of the finds that we have today are, in a sort of sad way, thanks to climate change, because as the permafrost thaws, things pop out, right? And so buried within these tissues are, of course, the genetic material that's preserved over long periods of time. What we don't have, and what some groups have been looking for, is live cells, or sort of hibernating cells, so to speak, in these
dormant cells.
Dormant cells, yeah. And after sort of 25 years in this field, unfortunately, that doesn't exist, because that would be the easiest way. You get a cell, and that would be much easier than the way that people are talking about it today.
And in the case of the woolly mammoth, is it that there is the abundance of animals that makes it a good candidate for de-extinction? Like, what is it about the woolly mammoth?
I mean, definitely in terms of fossil remains, they're a dime a dozen if you go to Siberia, which I did with my wife in 25 as part of our summer vacation. You find them, strewn across the open tundra now. And so that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that we have a close living relative. So the cousins are, of course, the Asian elephant. And they're actually only separated by about 5 million years. And so that's a close relative, genetically speaking, to be able to say what makes a mammoth, and how do we distinguish that at the genetic level from an Asian elephant.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because I probably should have. Have we done this before? Have we brought other species back through de-extinction?
Oh, well, that's a really interesting question. Actually, we have. So what do you think?
Tell me. I don't know. I'm like guessing. I'm thinking it's something very small, a small organism.
It's very small.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's not a particular animal. It's not an animal at all. It actually turns out to be a virus. Right? So the only truly de-extincted strain is the 1918 flu, right? Which was this tremendous,
millions.
that killed 50 million people across the globe, right? So they're small RNA from lungs of armed forces, individual from the American military, were used to piece it back together. And the reason for that research was, why did it kill so many people? Why are flus so deadly? And why is it that only every so often you get one that's a huge pandemic that kills 3 to 4 to 5%, right? Which is a huge number by comparison to the annual flus. So we have de-extincted something.
That's the only thing?
That's the only thing.
Okay,
right?
We're going to talk more about pandemics and flus tomorrow.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I'm only laughing because I'm thinking, like, it's a microscopic virus that we've been successful at.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So you're going, like, to the other end of the spectrum. Like, let's bring one of the biggest beasts that have ever roamed planet Earth back.
Yeah.
Is the process essentially the same for the two?
The process is actually surprisingly similar in the sense that whether or not you have a 100-year-old flu from lungs preserved in formalin on a slide in an old military barracks, as opposed to tusks buried for 20,000 years under the ground, the process is the same in terms of the genetic material. Everything goes from long, intact, like in our living cells, to little tiny pieces. And really, there's no correlation with age. So it really doesn't matter how old the fossil it is, it really matters how it was preserved. So everything's tiny, and in the same thing that they did with the flu, one would have to do with the mammoth, we'd have to piece these little tiny stretches together. And so that's what we've sort of done in this recent analysis of the complete woolly mammoth genome, is piece that together and then say, when we compare that to the Asian elephant, how many differences are there? Because since they're cousins, a lot must be shared. And it turns out a lot is shared between the two.
But here, I want to just get back to something that you said earlier. You're missing, in terms of the woolly mammoth, this live cell.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do you address that particular challenge?
Yeah. So this is where the science and the technology are working on, but of course we aren't quite there yet. And so what you would do is you would line up that woolly mammoth genome, which is immense actually, it's several billion bigger than our own. And you'd line it up to the Asian elephant and you go, okay, every place there's a difference, we need to note that down. And then you try to make an estimate of what are those differences that really make a mammoth a mammoth. And that's a big question, an important question, because is it a mammoth to you and me? Is it something that's hairier than an Asian elephant that had fat deposits that could withstand the cold? Or are we really talking about everything, the physiology, the behavior? So then we would take those changes that we think are significant and we would modulate them using a technology, a recombinant technology like CRISPR-Cas, which is big in gene world today, to change the Asian elephant chromosomes to actually reflect mammoth signatures. And then you would take an Asian elephant egg, you would kick out its own chromosomes, and you would replace it with the chromosomes of the modified mammoth.
Wow.
And then you would need some sort of carrier. You would need an Asian elephant mother to carry this individual then to term. And these are not simple things. Actually, sequencing the genome of the mammoth is by far much easier than all the downstream procedures.
Right. And where are we in this journey?
We are just at the blueprint. We now have the blueprint of what makes a woolly mammoth a woolly mammoth. So we I know
we haven't mapped its genome completely.
It's, well, It's complete in the sense that we know the differences between the woolly and the Asian elephant.
Okay.
So that we know. And George Church, who's a famous geneticist at Harvard, has already worked on changing some of those genes in an Asian elephant and then putting them into a cell to see if those differences can be tested. So we're at that stage, but certainly he's looking at an order of sort of a dozen changes, when in reality we're still talking about several million differences between a mammoth and an Asian elephant.
Okay, so we're
long way to go.
Long ways to go, which is fine. This is how science works.
This is how
right?
it goes. Yeah.
If we get to the stage, and it is an if, right? Like this
That's
could
right.
fall apart at kind of any of these stages. I just think of mapping the human genome, which we all celebrate and stuff, which was amazing, but
still,
the idea that we were going from there to the next place very quickly, it's a long leap.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you map this thing, if this thing gets mapped, you map a genome, and you separate sort of the elephant from the woolly mammoth,
Yeah.
but you need elephant DNA.
That's right.
Is it really a woolly mammoth if
Well,
you're using elephant DNA?
That's an important question, actually. Yeah, what do we call a woolly mammoth? What's a woolly mammoth to you, to an ecologist, to a conservation biologist, to school kids? And that brings up a very interesting point in science in general, and more specifically with humans. So there was a very famous Swedish biologist named Carl Linnaeus, and he developed this idea of classification, right? Genus, family, order, species. And that's very attuned to humans because we like to categorize things, right? Just go to IKEA and you'll see that everything has a particular order in place, right? But biology and nature is much dirtier than that, right? There isn't this sense of purity, right? So humans, for example, have inbred dogs to be very distinct breeds. We even call them races, which of course is a term that as a geneticist you really don't like to use. But that purity has led to tremendously deformed and disease-prone hip dysplasia types of animals. And in nature, that's the one thing you really don't want to do. You want as much diversity as possible. And so the reality with the Asian elephant and the mammoth is that we would have some sort of hybrid. It would be a hybrid between an Asian and a mammoth. It would probably display all the features that make it look like a woolly mammoth to you and I. We couldn't probably tell the difference. But if I had a time machine, I could go back 11,000 years, and I compared the behavior of a mammoth population 11,000 years ago with one that we had generated via this form of hybridization, we'd probably notice subtle differences, right?
Okay, so how much of a woolly mammoth / elephant is a woolly mammoth?
Well, that's it. I don't know. You tell me, Pierre.
I don't know.
That's a million dollar question, right?
Let's say it's 60% of a woolly mammoth. And it goes back to this idea that we're really hung up on purity. We see it in the dog world all the time, right?
That's right.
My dog's this, your dog's that.
That's right.
Blah, blah,
And you
blah.
pay big bucks, right?
Does it matter really for the work that you're doing?
No, not at all. Not at all. I don't think at all. The key in this particular case with de-extinction would be to create a species that fills the ecological role that it had in its past, right? Because that would be the only reason to bring back an extinct species. To have it as sitting in a zoo for our perusal is not really what de-extinction is all about. It's really about the reintroduction of a species into a natural habitat that then brings life back that isn't there anymore.
How do you bring back a beast into a place that now has larger populations than it did when it roamed?
Well, there
so
again,
many other ecological changes.
That's right. No, and that's why there's extinction, de-extinction candidates and basically non-candidates. And there's a set of questions that we go through in trying to determine what are really species that have a place still today, right? A surrogate population that could actually then be reintroduced. And so, for example, one good example is the Xerces butterfly from San Francisco for the Bay Area that went extinct in 1941. Beautiful blue butterfly. And it had a very important ecological role on the dunes. In 1941, San Francisco was expanding like mad. If you've been to the Bay Area, you know it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And so not surprising, the dunes are gone, the landscape is gone. And now there's a big movement to reintroduce those landscapes back. But the natural flora requires these butterflies to be reintroduced. So that would be a good example. I think there is a desire and a want, and maybe it gives people in San Francisco a reason to go, we really need to bring this back because we can bring back this beautiful butterfly and reintroduce it into this natural landscape.
Just to be clear, because I think people are like, well, you're like this cowboy scientist, so wouldn't it be cool to bring back the woolly mammoth? Can I be that guy. That's not what this is about.
No, not at all. It's not at all about that. I mean, I've been studying woolly mammoths for 15 years, and my interest has really been the evolutionary history of mammoths, how they're related to elephants. There were many types of woolly mammoths from Western Europe throughout Asia, Siberia, all the way down to Mexico. And they all had very different shapes and sizes. And so my question is really, what was the mixing between them? Were they distinct species? Were they pure again? What was the level of interaction between those two? And ultimately, what killed them all off? Right? They had managed to survive for millions of years without any problem. And then 11,000 years ago, it's like they hit a wall and they all disappeared. And so what does understanding extinctions tell us about what we need to be worried about in terms of the future?
You're doing this? Is there competition to be the scientist, the lab, the institution that brings back the woolly mammoth? And I only ask that not from the cowboy aspect, but science is competitive, and usually that drives everything from funding to pushing barriers to doing all those things. How competitive is this?
Well, science in general is very competitive, and depending upon, and certainly within this field, even mapping the genomes of these extinct animals is exceptionally competitive. And that's all based, you know, it's a sad reality, but it's the way it works. And the weird difference between, say, a business and a science is that as scientists, we may have these great sort of innovative, creative ideas, but we have to propose them, and they're reviewed by our competitors, right? So can you imagine Nike submitting design for a new shoe to Adidas, and Adidas going, no, I don't really think I like that, right? So it's a very strange world. You have these great ideas, but you submit them, and then they're, not surprisingly, if you're dealing with a competitor, they're killed for the wrong reasons.
Fair enough. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. I want to just shift gears because when we talk about this, we have to talk about ethics of doing this. So we're going to show a clip from Jurassic Park, probably the most famous fictionalized account of de-extinction in a very Hollywood way.
That's right.
So this is Jeff Goldblum's character talking about the ethics of bringing back an extinct species. Take a look.
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Okay, Jeff Goldblum, raising Hollywood ethics.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the real ethics of doing something like this. How aware are scientists about the implications of this kind of work in the ethical sense?
Oh, I think very aware. I mean, of course, in everything, there's always a spectrum, right? A distribution of those that want to go march ahead without thinking about the ethics, and there are those that are really sort of deep-seated in trying to understand them, right?
And what are the ethical concerns for you?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest ones is animal welfare, right? So it's, you know, de-extincting a butterfly is very different than de-extincting a woolly mammoth. So if you take the mammoth, for example, if we would have to have an Asian elephant surrogate, you know, mothers, Asian elephants gestate basically only every 2 years, right? And there's a 2-year term by the time they actually give birth. So, and the mammoth would be slightly larger, so it would have to be a cesarean section. So you can imagine that the just from an animal welfare rights issue, there's huge ethical concerns around that.
And you said if they bring this woolly mammoth, like if you or if others do, it would be released into the wild.
Well, of course, that's, yeah. I mean,
It's such a weird term to use in 2015, because what is the wild anymore?
Yeah, well, so the mammoths are lucky because that's still part of the wild that humans haven't really completely inhabited, right? I mean, if you look at the northern swaths of Siberia, there's actually a great scientist there, Dr. Zimov, who's created Pleistocene Park, where he actually has vast open landscapes for just that. He's got Canadian bison there, he's got saiga antelope, horses, and it would be a perfect place for woolly mammoths to go, as would the Yukon and Northwest Territories, right?
When you're balancing the ethics of doing this, and you made the case for why we should bring the woolly mammoth back, how do you find that balance, the need to bring it back versus the ethical consideration from everything from birthing one of these things to the effects on the environment? Where do you find the balance?
Well, I think, you know, that's some people get angry that I don't fall on one side or the other side. I can't say that I'm a strong proponent for bringing the woolly mammoth back. I can't say I'm a strong proponent against it, but I try to maintain the discussion open on both sides, because if we don't, as scientists, I think we've lost.
Okay, make the argument. It's not
Yeah.
your argument, but make the argument. We've heard the one for bringing it back. What's the argument for not bringing it back?
The argument for not bringing back is that, well, there's a couple of them. One is, do we lose our sense of conservation on current species, right? Do all of a sudden we have all this focus on these extinction, and we become then, as geneticists, we become scapegoats, right? Who cares about the extinction of the mountain gorillas? Because scientists will be able to bring it back, right? And so I think it's critical to emphasize to the general public and people in general that this process is a painful one. It's a long road. It's an expensive one. And success isn't guaranteed at all, right? And then we talked about reintroduction. Well, reintroduction, what's a lone woolly mammoth going to be? It's going to be like Frankenstein, right? What was he looking for? Love, right? So you're going to have to bring back another one. And then you need a whole breeding population. And mammoths and elephants are highly social organisms, even spiritual, some people say, right? They bury their dead, for example. So how do we actually do that in a successful way? And I can't see the light there yet. Right. So if that's something in the future that's possible, then maybe it's the right time to do it.
Right, it's just too early to think about those things.
It's too early to think about some of these. So I think we need to be very careful with how we proceed.
Where do we get if we don't get to that end game? Like if we don't get all the way to physically resurrecting, where's the next sort of goal for you?
Well, so if we can understand why these animals went extinct, can we use the technology that we tried to get to de-extinction by introducing novel genetic variation into populations that are critically endangered today? So we can take rhinos that are really on the brink of extinction, add diversity, a layer of protection, which we have to do now from poachers, and then hopefully that diversity will allow them to start breeding on their own without artificial insemination, and we save them from ultimate extinction. I think that's good. And ultimately, if this whole debate brings out the energy and the revitalization of the conservation movement, I don't know about you, but growing up as a kid in Berkeley with tie-dyes, it was all doom and gloom, right? Everything was going to be gone by the time my grandkids were grown, and so it was a very sad argument. If we can use any of this to excite the kids as to the potential for restoring habitats like the river dolphin in China, right? Could we bring it back since it's actually ecologically extinct? Well, we might be able to, because tissues are great and there's some that are even frozen. But maybe more importantly, that'll get people that live along the Yangtze River to actually say, we need to change our habits because we can reintroduce and make this a better place for all of us to live.
Okay, let me throw this argument. I know you've heard it at a dinner party or at a cocktail party where someone says, Hendrik, where the heck does this stop? Like, you know, you're playing God. Where does this stop? So, I don't know. Throw out bringing back a Neanderthal, right? I mean. Yeah. Extinct species of humans. I mean, is this stuff actual possible, or is this the stuff of dinner party fodder where we like to get into an argument about where we stop, sort of quote unquote playing God?
Yeah, so as a geneticist and as a scientist in general, I take issue a bit with playing God, because we don't seem to have a problem playing God when we talk about antibiotic production or the development of heart valves, or, right? We are artificially inflating life by intervention, right? If we were out in the wild, unfortunately, natural selection would take us if we were not adapted or we were sick or so on and so forth. I think the reality is that something that looks and feels like a woolly mammoth is the science of eventuality, to quote Jurassic Park. But I think it's critical that we think very deeply and meaningfully about what the implications and the ramifications of those decisions are. If it really aids us in developing technology that can help critically endangered species, then maybe it's a good thing. But if it's just for doing it, then that's not the reason as scientists we should be doing it in the first place.
Is there a moral argument to bring species back like the woolly mammoth, or I was just trying to think of something else that humans completely wiped out versus things that went away by a more natural extinction process?
Yeah, so that's interesting, because that you know, when I give public lectures in libraries and so on and so forth, and I ask people about things like the quagga or the marsupial wolf, this beautiful marsupial wolf from Australia that we know we killed 150 years ago. There's no question that human hunters did them in. Do we have then an obligation to bring them back? And I would say it's very split in the audience as to, yes, we really should, whereas the other, no, absolutely not. It's unfortunate, but it's part of extinction, and it serves as a valuable lesson that, you know, extinction may really end, should be, indeed forever.
This is always good, the intersection of science and ethics and morality.
Yes,
This is where
it's
the
critical.
geneticist exists. Okay, my last dinner party question. We'll round out
Okay.
our conversation. When are we going to see a woolly mammoth roam the earth?
Wow, yeah, that's I get that question asked a lot. You know, so 10 years ago, I was quoted as saying we would never have the blueprint for a woolly mammoth. And then
So your guy is wrong.
I was wrong. That's right. I got it completely wrong. And the technology shifted, and now we have the blueprint for a woolly mammoth that I was involved with this group at Harvard in Sweden. So I'm a bit more hesitant now to say never, or 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years. The technology is moving continually at an alarming pace. So I would guess maybe 50 years from now we might see something like that.
Maybe you're wrong. Maybe
I'm
you're
wrong.
right.
Maybe I'm wrong.
We
maybe
shall
I'm right.
see.
Yes.
Thank you. This is fascinating. We're going to talk tomorrow about different kinds of things that have come back from extinction.
Yes.
Plagues and
Plagues,
things. Okay,
yes.
we'll move on to that tomorrow. Thank you for tonight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.